I call this the second meeting of the Efficient and Effective School District Conference Task Force to order. Please silence your cell phones. I'm going to recognize Senator Nemes as my co-chair. And do we have any guests anybody wants to introduce? No. Okay, great. Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Senator Neal, Senator Tishner, Representative Bojanowski.
Here.
Representative Fleming. Brittany Abdelahad. Philip Baker.
Here.
Angela Masden.
Here.
George Nichols. Rebecca Nicholas. Jody Wurtenberger.
Here.
Allison Ball.
Here.
Representative Tipton.
Here.
Senator Nemes.
Present.
Chair Banta.
Present. Do we have a quorum? Okay. Since we have a quorum, is there a motion to approve the minutes of July 15th meeting?
Second.
Is there a second? Okay. All in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. All right. The minutes are approved. All right. We would have our first presenters come up. Dr. Polio, thank you. And just introduce yourselves, make sure that your light is really, really green, and when you're ready, we're ready.
Good afternoon. So thank you once again, Marty Polio, Superintendent, Jefferson County Public Schools. To my left is Dr. Katie DeFerrari, Chief of Staff, and to my right is Dr. Tara Greenwell, who is our Chief Academic Officer. I won't go through listing all the people from JCPS that are here, but raise your hand. Most are academic support personnel, and so thank you all for being here today to support, especially on the presentation around literacy and numeracy that we do want to spend a great deal of time on today. Once again, thank you for having us here. We will be reporting out on what you all requested us to report out on. First, some of the financial things, contracts, and the such that you asked us to report on. And then the second half of the presentation will be on literacy and numeracy and how we teach that in JCPS. So first of all, we will start with where we kind of left off. This was a slide from our last presentation of district employees. We have little over 18,000 total employees. That includes subs, which is a good number of them. But as you can see, 69% school-based, 31% non-school-based. Those include subs, bus drivers, all of the nutrition workers, those type of things. Certified staff, 7,800. Classified staff, a little over 10,200. But that, once again, we talked about this slide, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But it is what we wanted to present as we start our presentation today. So first and foremost, the request was around teacher salaries. And so we wanted to provide you, and there is a link or a QR code, I guess is what they call it nowadays. If you want to click on that, that takes to all employee pay scales. So you can see that as you choose. But this gives you a little bit of a summary. So first year out of college or first year in teaching, 0 years experience, a teacher enters JCPS earning $48,038 per year. If you go over 2, you can see rank 1 with 25 years experience. That teacher would make $94,207. The average JCPS teacher salary, if we take all teachers, that average salary is a little over $76,000, $76,224. So that gives you a little bit salaries of teachers. I did want to that far box there, which was something that we did new this year. In order to try attract teachers to our highest need schools. And essentially, I think the most important part is retaining those teachers in our highest need schools. So we call the choice zone is the area of what is essentially District 1, our board member district area. It encompasses the Smoketown area, downtown Louisville, and really the entirety of Louisville's West End. And so if a school in our choice zone or AIS stipend our AIS schools are those that have been traditionally underperforming. Those teachers start at an $8,000 a year stipend that we provide to those teachers, and the more they stay, it can go up to as much as $14,000 a year. That is on top of their salary. So last year was our first year implementing this model. We had done it before where we gave a much smaller stipend, but this is our focus here is to make sure our teachers in our highest need school, we're attracting, we're retaining them, we're bringing some seniority into these schools, and they're being paid more than many of their peers as well. We were asked about collective bargaining agreements that we have in JCPS. There are 4 different collective bargaining agreements that we work through in JCPS. The one you are probably most aware of is Jefferson County Teachers Association. And once again, we have QR codes to all of these agreements if you would like to read any of these agreements at any time. JCTA includes teachers, mental health practitioners, librarian, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech therapists. So JCTA represents all of those teachers. The second one down is the Jefferson County Association of Educational Support Personnel, which includes nutrition workers, clerical staff, instructional support like IAs, and then some technology, a limited number of technology jobs that we have. And then we have what we call SEIU, which is the Service Employees International Union, which is custodians, housekeeping, utility, employees, and plant operators, as you can see there. And then finally, we have an agreement. We just came to terms with a contract with Teamsters that was agreed upon and passed on July 23rd, 2024. The largest number of those are bus drivers, are with our Teamsters our Teamsters Local 783, but we also have mechanics, service maintenance, in-school monitors, IT, special needs transportation assistance. So those are the 4 contracts we work through, or the 4 organizations we work through with collective bargaining. Once again, you can see each of those agreements that we have by scanning that QR code in your packet. So what is negotiated? I think it's important to note all the things we negotiate in each of the 4 contracts. First and foremost, on a yearly basis, compensation. We do work on what is called a Me Too clause, meaning once we agree to one clause with one of the unions, all 4 of them get the same financial package, so to speak. And usually that means in terms of raises. So if we raise teacher pay by 2%, then that would go to all 4 of those contracts as well, meaning all of our full-time employees rightfully would get that raise. We negotiate things like how we pay hours, overtime, extra work. Working conditions are negotiated in the contract. How we transfers, assignment, selection. So an example would be how teachers transfer from one school to the next, but that could be in each of those 4 contracts. Grievances, employer-provided training, employee rights, discipline, personnel records, and evaluation are all included in each of those 4 contracts that we negotiate. And so as you can see, we just put this up for you, what is difference between bargained and what is difference and JCPS policy. I won't reread what was under the bargained. That was to the left, or to my left, as I look at it, but same thing as I just went over. Board policy, though, bargain for, that is what our board passes, powers and duties, administration, personnel, fiscal management, school facilities, transportation, support services, curriculum and instruction, student procedures, community relations, and employee negotiations. Our board does have to pass each of those 4 negotiated contracts, but as you can see, that's the difference between a bargain contract and JCPS policy. I did want to talk to you a little bit about the raises that we have given our employees. And so from about 2010, really until about 2017, there was not significant raises given to employees in JCPS. Which we look back and probably got us a little bit behind where we wanted to be. In 17-18, we started with a 1.5% raise. As you can see, in 18-19, 19-20, it was a 0.5% raise. Those were during some much tighter fiscal times for the district than where we sit right now. 2020, 21, 22, there was not a raise, but we did give a $5,000 stipend to all employees in 2020, 2021, and a $1,000 stipend the following year. So employees were given $6,000, not in ongoing raises, but in stipends. Since that time, really coming back from the pandemic and facing the shortages that we face in so many of our critical roles, we've been very assertive with identifying the need to increase our compensation for all of our staff. So in 22-23, we had a 4% raise, 23-24, a 5% raise, which competes with about everybody in the state, a 9% raise over 2 years. This year, we are given a 2% raise, next year a 3% raise. So as you can see, that is a 14% raise that we are providing all of our employees over a 4-year period, which I don't have the data in front of me, but I believe exceeds what our employees got over the decade before that. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. DeFerrari, who will talk about some of our contracts and MOAs.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm not going to read all the items on this slide, but it'll definitely be here for you to go and look back. This would represent the teachers that we have that are on a memorandum of agreement with the Kentucky Department of Education. So again, they are our staff that are working under the purview of KDE. You can see there's 29 of those total. If you look at the next 2 to 3 bullets, it will identify for you that those teachers have gone across time. Again, we didn't just do 29. That has been a process over time. You can also see that roughly 2/3 of those function as education recovery specialists or education recovery leaders. Those folks directly support schools that are identified by the state. And I would say the overwhelming majority of those are serving schools in Jefferson County Public Schools. Also, you can see that most of them, 24 of the 29, were school-based staff. So they left a school-based position. And now it doesn't have to be a teacher position. It could have been administrator. It could have been a resource teacher. But again, 24 of the 29 came right out of the classroom. We're going to talk a little bit about contracts and agreements that Jefferson County has with different groups that you've requested us to share with you. You're going to hear me say the word scale and capacity multiple times because as a large school district, it does take the ability to deal with the vast diversity and scale of things that we need supported. In terms of legal, you can see on this slide, we have 4 partners that work with us on legal matters. I've identified for you what our primary areas of work are with each of those groups. I do want to make sure that you understand that we always monitor the cost effectiveness of these partnerships. So for instance, if we are determining that the work we're doing maybe in the work of exceptional child education in a certain area is getting large enough in scale, we will identify a position in Jefferson County and create that. What we always want to make sure we're not doing is creating extra administrative positions when we can be as cost efficient working with one of these 4. You can see Wyatt, Tarrant, and Combs. That's mostly property and overflow. You see Ucelis, Mayer, and Associates is all workman's comp. McBrayer, McGinnis, Leslie, and Kirkland is ECE law, which we have lots of work in that category. And then Tackhow Meeks is special litigation work. Now we'll shift to financial agreements. One important thing to understand is we follow model procurement with all of these. These are RFPs. So different agencies bid and then are selected through that process. You can see Dean Dorton works with us primarily around our financial auditing services, school activity funds audits, and then large grants. Armanino works with us mostly with the internal audit staff. We obviously have 3 bank partners, Fifth Third, Republic, and Truist. And then finally, we have Munis as our statewide accounting system. Again, one thing to also remember about these, besides the fact that we're huge, is there are not a lot of providers that can support us, that have capacity to serve us in these regards. And so we also have to pay close attention to conflicts of interest, meaning certain times where we cannot use a particular vendor or partner because they're being used for another purpose, for an external audit or something of that nature, which can sometimes even limit the number of groups we have to choose from in Louisville. Contracts with staffing agencies. Again, we only use this if we're having a hard time finding staff or it is more cost efficient for us to use a contract service. In terms of nurses, that's a perfect example of one where we have some of our own nurses. We also contract a large number of nurses. We do have a nurse in every one of our schools. You can see about 3/4 of those we contract, and those that are at unique places that might be harder to staff, we have invested in having nurses that we can hire in-house. You can see we also do some custodial service contracts, nursing assistants. Obviously, we're doing our most recent one with TARC to get bus driver support in Jefferson County. And then finally, we have Frontline, not for the purposes of choosing staff, but for applications, time and attendance reporting, and things of that nature. If we're talking about our educational partners, one thing that we're really excited about in terms of our educational partners is this just stretches the number of people we have outside of the many thousand Dr. Polio has talked about to support kids. Every single one of these agencies, the YMCA, we use CEP services, obviously, is our primary partnership, university instructors for early childhood to make sure that all those classrooms are covered. And then Evolve 502 with the Backpack League and Summer Learning. They also support us with some extended learning opportunities. And again, all this does is stretch the breadth and scope of the number of qualified and caring adults that support our students to increase student achievement, make sure that students have everything that they need. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Greenwell, who's going to talk a little bit about our academic contracts.
Hi, thank you for letting us be here today. In terms of the academic contracts, you're going to see a variety here. I wanted to point out a few. EL Education and Illustrative Math are our curriculum. Otis and Imagine Learning and Kidem are platforms. So we know we live in a digital age, so that our students have access both in school and at home through digital platforms. Edmentum, you would think of that as course recovery or credit recovery. And then we have NWEA, CAPTI, and CERT, which are meeting our legislative policy for our screeners and our diagnostics. And then Language Line for our multilingual learners to ensure that we have quick services and that we can get our kids and our families what they need in a quick manner. Think CIRCA and DBQ specifics. There's other smaller contracts, but those were the bigger ones that relate specifically to our curriculum or legislative policy. I wanted to point out a few things that we take into account when it comes to academic contracts. In terms of equity of access, being a larger school district, we're able to get discounted prices for our students when we are creative and work collectively with our vendors. We also have consistent and clear messaging across our school district, and we are aligned to KDE's guidance for high quality instructional resources. And then I'd like to give a shout out to the folks behind me because they are the ones that work collaboratively with vendors or any contracts to ensure that the messaging is clear and consistent and that kids at the ground level are getting what they need.
We were also asked to discuss school allocations. Once again, you have a QR code that will give you access to every school allocation in JCPS. We do follow the 702 KAR, which talks about how you are supposed to have a regulatory formula for every single school that is per student based on how you then have certified, classified, operational staff. There are requirements, for instance, librarian that you have to have in every single school building. And so that is really where we operated from until a couple of years ago when we implemented what we called our future state, which was essentially there were add-ons to that formula, but our goal was to resource our highest poverty school and get kids what they needed most. And in order to make sure that we eliminate the achievement gap between black and white students, free and reduced and non-free and reduced lunch students, and so forth. And so we have really tried to make sure, and you will be able to see this as you look into school budgets, that those with the highest poverty rates will have the highest amounts of financial supports in their school. That could include what I talked about, which was the AIS choice zone. So traditionally, for many decades in JCPS, most senior teachers have transferred to our lower need schools. And so that may skew the funding of a salary that a teacher receives. But now that we are adding a minimum $8,000 for every teacher in an AIS or choice zone, that completely changes that. Our academic supports, making sure we support on top they have everything a student or teacher could possibly need. Student athletics and activities, we have worked hard to make sure there's another type of funding in schools that you are probably very aware of. I call it supplementary funding, not from the district, but it is more of athletics, gates to games, PTSA accounts, alumni associations, And usually our higher poverty schools don't have access to that supplementary funding. We have raised the amount of money necessary external to taxpayers' dollars so that we can provide all of our highest needs schools those athletics and activities support, so they have exactly the same things that all of our schools have. On top of that, we provide career and technical education, attendance support, student support, Frisky, more counseling, mental health services to our higher needs schools. We know that many of our higher needs schools have more multilingual learners, so supporting them. We have intentionally come in this year with our budget to truly support our multilingual learners because of the growth in our district. We had not done that in about a decade, which we have doubled our multilingual learners in a decade. So it was important for us to make sure we are supporting our multilingual learners and then our special education department. And then finally, we just wanted to add in, I've had 7 audits since starting as superintendent in 2017, but we did want to bring to you comments from previous audits and reviews of JCPS 18, 19, 20, and 2022. These are all external audits of JCPS, and I think they speak very highly of the work that we're doing and continue to do. That doesn't mean we don't need to continue improvement, but I think all 4 of these, whether it's the Council of Great City Schools, Cognia, KDE Management Audit, or KDE Diagnostic Review, will talk about the work that's happening in JCPS. And a part of that work we're very proud of. And once again, thank you to what you passed that allowed us to have a district-wide curriculum has made a major difference in our work at schools. And I'm pleased now to turn it over to Dr. Greenwell, who will be discussing curriculum, specifically literacy and numeracy in JCPS.
Can you let's pause for a second?
Sure.
We have some questions. The first, I'm going to go chair privilege. I'm going to go first.
Sure.
Which I think the stipend to go to the more difficult schools is just genius. How many teachers took advantage of that? Because, I mean, that's almost a lifestyle change, $8,000.
Yeah, and so, and I will say this, coming from I was a principal at what was called a priority school at the time. You want a combination, but you want people who are fired up about doing the work of turnaround and that type of thing. And so it's not for everybody. But what we did find over the course of the past 8 to 10 years is the pool was getting thinner and thinner of people who wanted to come to all of our schools. That's the teaching profession itself, but our higher need schools even had higher need. And so our focus was getting more people involved, but then also retaining teachers. So we did have a good number who jumped at that opportunity from the beginning. We will see here in September as we wrap up our hiring numbers what that retention will look like. It is still a challenge. I'm not going to say that it's not still a challenge in our highest need schools to bring in staff because it is a tougher job. But as you said, we believe this 8,000 up to 14,000 for those that stay there for many years is a huge difference, up to about 25% of a teacher's salary.
So would you say that it's working then, in your opinion?
Yes, I think we're going to have to look at it long term. And I want to say this, we still have vacancies at our high need schools. But for the first time ever, with added spots as well to schools, because we went to smaller class sizes, many of our elementary schools are having 2 teachers in a classroom, which we think is very much needed in our highest need schools. So yes, I think it's working. We're going to have to see over time whether we are hitting the right number or not when it comes to the stipend. But yes, I do believe it's working.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, this is just a simple one. On the memorandum of understandings, does JCPS pay the salaries or does KDE pay the
KDE
salaries?
reimburses JCPS for the salaries.
Thank you.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you'll bear with me, I do have more than one question.
Go right ahead.
Thank you all for being here. And on that topic of retaining teachers, just as just an anecdotal situation, I ran into someone I knew was a JCPS teacher on Saturday. Hey, so you ready for the school year? She said, I retired. 22 years and I'm out. So as I'm talking to her, she didn't talk about salary, she talked about discipline. And I know that's a major issue. Dr. Polio, I know you and I have talked about the difficulty that you have in finding that appropriate balance of discipline, and also not having the federal government come down on you. Could you share a little bit about the difficulty in maintaining that balance and what you all are doing to help improve discipline in the schools at JCPS?
Yeah, first and foremost, let me say we're very proud. In the past 2 years, we have had a significant decline in the number of what we would call egregious behavior incidents. And so we're not talking about chewing gum or talking out, but we are talking about the more very challenging behavior issues. And so we are seeing a trend of decline in that, which is very positive in nearly every single category of discipline referral. But that does not mean that's not still an issue. It was an issue prior to COVID. It's been exacerbated since COVID. I think we're starting to balance out where we're not seeing that COVID impact that we did maybe 18 to 24 months ago. But there is no doubt it is a challenge. It's been a challenge for my entire 30-year career, which is the balance between high standards for student behavior and expectations of students, while at the same time making sure students are in school so that they can learn, while at the same time having to face scrutiny from a variety of various educational groups, both federal and state, as to whether we are disproportionately impacting certain student groups. And so, I say that one of my biggest challenges or frustrations that I have in my career is, on the one hand, I can be told we're under-disciplining students by not disciplining enough, while the next day I can be in a meeting with a federal group or even a state group who says we're over-disciplining students. And that's just a real challenge and a frustration for me, that I think we're not aligned, whether it's state or federal or even local, with everything we can do and what should be done to meet the needs of kids. So it's just a real challenge, as we've talked about before.
Madam Chair, if I could have another question.
Yes.
I know that with the issue of SROs in schools, concerned about school safety, JCPS made the decision to develop your own police department. Could you share a little bit about the current staffing situation with your police department, and where do you see that going with hopefully down the road maybe having some type of security or officer? I know we just passed Senate Bill 2 that allows guardians in providing safety and security in our schools.
Yeah, so I'm very proud. We presented to our board last Tuesday night about the progress of the Jefferson County Police Department. And I will say this, it was a very contentious vote in 2019 when our board voted to remove SROs from schools. I want to be clear, at that time there were 28 SROs. LMPD was pulling 20 out because of a shortage of police officers in LMPD, which meant we were left with 8 police officers at the time. So, it was a very contentious vote and very, it was a very public vote and disputed, but it was just 8 police officers in 8 schools at the time. We knew at the time that large school districts across this nation, the vast majority of them have their own police department and successfully do that, where they report to a chief, but also the chief reports to the superintendent. We define the training. And when you had multiple police agencies, they were working on different SOPs. And so now we have one Jefferson County Police Department who works on the same standard operating procedures, the same training, the same hiring, everything. We have 40 police officers now, which is a huge gain over the past year. So Todd Kessinger, our chief, has done an amazing job of attracting police officers to JCPS. We have 40 of those. We have weapons detections in all of our high schools now. Will be middle schools. We have to have a police officer every morning, obviously at that checkpoint where kids are walking in. But we have 40. We are right now hiring for 15 more. We believe we'll have that in the next couple of months, where we will have now 55 police officers. When we have 55 police officers and the support administrative staff above them, that gives us the opportunity to have one police officer for 3 schools, so an elementary, a middle, and a high school. or a middle and two elementaries, one high and two elementaries as well. But they will be geographically based, so the principals will know who that police officer is. They'll go to the school when needed. The principal will have the access to them, and they will be in that general vicinity of location. So 55 is where we our goal is right now, which would put us in really good shape. But I do think we will continue to explore whether we can get more than that. But once again, as we know, just like most police departments, our goal is to have quality police officers, because it is a little different working with children every single day and making sure they are trained as SROs and ready to do that kind of work.
Another? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that at the end of each, I haven't seen the current year-end fiscal year F1 balance as I have in the past. How did JCPS finish out the year as your F1 balance or your reserves on hand? And what are some of the uses that you're hoping to be able to utilize those reserves for in the future?
Yeah, so right now we haven't finalized that number. We know it was in the 300 millions. Last year it will be lower than that. And so right now where we are is, when you look at a percent of your budget is really how KDE does that. And so our number seems much larger than other districts, although it fits right into the percentage of most districts across the state. And as a matter of fact, there are numerous districts that are much higher percentages of their total budget. The past year, we spent $90 million more than we took in, and we are curbing that each year to get down to that balanced budget. And so that reserve will last us till about 2027, 28 is when we are preparing for a soft landing on our fiscal cliff. So I will tell you this, most large districts and many smaller districts around the nation right now are struggling with the end of ESSER dollars after the pandemic, and really added numerous amounts of positions. I said this last time, we did not. And instead focused on our current students, what we need, our current staff, how can we support them better in our schools. So we're not having to do that, but we do anticipate in 27, 28 that we will be under the $125 million in reserve, which puts us right at the number that KDE recommends.
All right, Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Polio. I just wanted to, first of all, recognize that 14% increase in the teacher's salary over the past couple of years. I know there's been a lot of struggle in terms of allocating your resources, and obviously the primary reason is really for teachers, because they're the engine in terms of getting our kids in a better spot. So I do appreciate your effort in doing that. I wanted to, on the third slide, you had teacher salaries. You have rank 3, then rank 1, and then choice. Could you break that out in terms of number of individuals within each that category?
We can. I can't do that for you right now, but I'm happy to send that on to you, how many are of each of these. I do believe correct me if I'm wrong, is it? So the JCPS salary, the average salary is about a 13-year employee. So we did discuss that this morning. So when we say average salary, the average tenure of one of our teachers is about 13 years right now, if you put them all in there. So that's where we get the average salary of $76,000. But we'd be happy to break that down for you.
I appreciate it. And off your cuff, do you think most of the teachers are rank 3 that you have, or is it more of an even distribution?
I believe, and this is just anecdotal from my perception, we have across this nation, we have less brand new teachers coming into the profession, and more are starting to become on the back end of it, which is a scary proposition for many of us in this. I mean, I think we are seeing, it's not this committee or us, but post-secondary certification programs are down about 50% across this nation, but in the Commonwealth as well. So I think you're seeing a lot less of the brand new teachers and a lot more of the veteran. But I can break that. I don't want to necessarily come back and that be different, but that's just my anecdotal feeling about it.
And I would probably concur with that assumption as well. I wanted to ask, in terms of your contracts, rather it's academic, financial, staffing, do y'all go through a 45A procurement process? And then if so, how do y'all use like value added price or quality based selections?
So I'll let Dr. Greenwell talk maybe about one of the, I will say this first, we do model procurement, which requires that we get bids, a certain amount of bids and put it out for any bid to be made, and we have the selection process that way. Can you talk about how you did contracts when it comes to literacy or any of your academic content?
Sure. For anything that's single source, there's a committee that comes together because usually it has a unique need for our folks. So we put together collaborative committees with representation across JCPS, across different departments, and we work to do our own internal research, looking at best practices, then looking at practitioner experience over time, coming together to then vet those before we make a final decision.
And I'll finish by saying we have an evaluation department that then works to evaluate the effectiveness of any of, especially when it has to do with student outcomes, to whether we keep doing that or not.
Okay. Madam Chair, I have 2 more questions. Thank you.
Proceed.
I appreciate, I can't remember, third to the last slide in terms of school allocations. And when I looked on it real quick, and I looked at it in the past, but reminded me what's in there. You have that's a pretty good fact sheet on each school, and I appreciate that data. But can that be tied to the actual outcome performance of the school? Like, for example, one school might have a great graduation rate, and here's the reasons why. Another school might have, like Benet or Churchill. I mean, we know the challenges they have, and that's going to be a little dynamics with that. Can those information be put on that type of a fact sheet to give a better perspective?
So outcomes per school?
They might be in 2 different databases.
I mean, they're in 2 different databases, but we can put them on there. We have already put outcomes on our web pages as required now, but we can provide that as well. I think the challenge becomes, Representative Fleming, the absolute fire hose of data that we have in education. So a school could have, 40 different, as a matter of fact, I think the accountability model now is up to, you can have 80 different colors on your school report card when it comes to red, yellow, green. And so, the things that you can look at to say every single school will find positives, every single school will find areas for growth. Our goal is to try to what we fund to prove that it's making student outcomes, or we can't keep doing it. And so that is really our goal, but we'd be happy to try to put that together for you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Last question, Madam Chair. I respect you, but I got a little tough question here.
All right.
So, and I appreciate your honesty. In your audits, and I appreciate those comments, this says, there is no reason to believe that the district's very experienced, committed staff will not rise to the occasion if appropriately led by the school board and the superintendent. I think the last word is appropriate, but could you comment on the prior one in terms of the being properly and adequately led by the school board?
Well, I mean, I will say this. I mean, a school board and a superintendent always have a relationship that is similar to an executive and a legislative branch in many ways. I mean, that is the executive branch, and it's not quite as divided as that. And when you see, but I mean, I bring recommendations, they vote on it, which at times means that there's going to be contention between the 2 groups. I will say this about our board. All 7, well now 6, but even when it was 7, all truly care about kids. This is a job that is probably $5,000 or $6,000 a year that comes with a whole lot of hard work and heartache. And so not that I always agree with everything that our school board, or whether it's a majority or if 1 or 2 members, I do believe they all care for what's best for our district and our schools, and they're willing to work hard to do that. So, that's how I feel about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Wartenberger.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. Again, thank you all for being here and sharing information and taking the time to answer our questions. Just to put a final point on the stipends, it sounds like it's a little too early to really tell its full impact, and we'll have to look at it going forward.
I would agree. I would agree with that 100%.
Okay. On the financial contracts, I was a little surprised to see internal audit services. I thought you had your own internal audit team. So can you clarify what they provide in that regard?
We do. We hired our internal audit team. That was a part of a reorganization, actually, with recommendation of one of our audits that we had. So we do have an internal auditor and a small staff.
Okay.
But I believe that, and I can't speak exactly to the work of this contract. I'd have to take a look at it. But I do believe it's in support of our internal audit team when needed.
Okay. I did have a question on the academic contracts, and maybe Dr. Greenwell, I'm going to save it because you're going to go through some of the curriculum, and specifically I was interested in the EL learning and the math. So that may get covered in what they do for those respective curriculums, okay? I think someone asked on how you manage or your procurement process on vendor contracts. I think we covered that just to make sure you have a procurement, you follow a procurement model, but there's also oversight on contracts that are existing and a good look on whether they're effective or not and whether to renew those contracts, right?
That is correct. So each of our contracts is recommended and overseen by one of the people on my cabinet. So they're the ones that have to submit that. So if it's an academic contract, Dr. Greenwell would submit it. It's the responsibility of her and her team to make sure that that contract is managed appropriately, that we're given the services that are in the contract. Then our evaluation team always begins to look at the impact that is having. Now, I'm not going to say causal impact is difficult to prove in education because you have so many different factors, but we do want to do studies on each of our major investments to make sure that we are getting the impact out of it that we want to in order to continue on.
Yeah, sure. You want to look at the outcomes. Are you getting the outcomes you think we're going to get? But are they also following the terms of the contract appropriately? Is
Correct.
All of that. So you're a big organization, have a lot of contracts. That's understandable. I just want to make sure those are all overseen effectively. Last question, on the add-on funding. I saw something that said attendance support. Last meeting, we talked how big of an issue attendance is. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious what that attendance support is. And one takeaway that I had from our last meeting, because we talked how big that chronic absenteeism issue is if you all had, I'll call it a rewards program for kids, perfect attendance, if you will. So sort of two questions related to the same thing there, if you will.
Yeah, so I will let Dr. DeFerrari, she oversees culture and climate, which is attendance. So if you could talk about that.
Thanks.
Sure. We have diverse supports for attendance. We try to support it multiple different ways because it's a complex problem. It can be anything from medical or mental health issues in the household with the student or someone in the family. It can have to do with barriers, other barriers with poverty. We have lots of reasons why our students are not at school. We start, our baseline, if you will, is social workers for our elementary age kiddos. And we have assistant directors of pupil personnel that service our middle and high schools. That team total is 25, 15 social workers, 10 ADPPs that support our middle and high schools. Each of those individuals supports the school doing the following. Every school is required to have an attendance improvement plan. Every one of those groups meets weekly with a group of relevant team members from the school. They might have their family resource use services person on their committee. They might have their school nurse. Many of them do. We also have metrics and monitor our nurses in regards to attendance because our nurses are a huge part of our attendance support initiative. Additionally, those ADPPs and social workers make house calls, home visits. They do family programming meetings, which is kind of our way of saying bringing a family together and unpacking what challenges are we having getting this student to school. Yes, we have to do certain truancy reporting and things of that nature, but I think all of us know that that tends to be our least successful way of really getting kids to school. And so we really want to make sure we try to be partners with the family and remove barriers. Is it housing insecurity, food insecurity? Is it transportation? Or are there other referrals and items that they need? Additionally, now if I switch to nurses, every school does have a nurse. Additionally, this year we've added 15 RNs to support regionally, so we can actually have a student have a doctor's appointment at school if we really need that and have parent approval. The nurses are there every day to do the things that you would imagine to try to keep kids at school. If I just have the sniffles, if I may be having allergy issues, other types of things that we can remedy with a little school commissary of medicines that are there with parent permission to give. We can often keep the student at school. Another thing that we do that's really helpful is we have nurses call if kids say, I don't feel good. A lot of our nurses will see the student and see what's happening with the student and then communicate with the family to make sure, does the student really need to go home, or are there other supports we can give, or do they need to be seen medically and we can have an RN come to the school. That's been a huge help for us. We are recently kicking off, maybe 3 or 4 months into what we call a rapid response partnership with Evolve 502. That is completely focused on chronic absenteeism from the community repair perspective. So who are other partners in the Louisville community that can help us reach out to families to get kids to school, remove barriers, find out why kids are not at school. That's going to be a multifaceted effort. Folks like the neighborhood place, the YMCA, other partners of ours are at the table to help figure out what are ways that they can help us work with families and remove barriers. So we've also got platforms to be able to send communication and congratulate kids that have been at school. I am a JCPS parent, so my kids are at school, and I get very positive text messages and emails that say, way to go, Brogan, she's been at school, or she has missed fewer days than her same age peers that attend her school. We also send those things in letter format that are also letting parents know your child has missed more than the average student at their school. All of those things are really high yield, well-researched practices that motivate people. And so we try to engage in those efforts as well.
So you said a lot of stuff there, a lot of great activity and tactics, and for me to throw out rewards program just sort of oversimplified everything that you just said. So I apologize for that. But I'm assuming that, I know it's varies school to school, but have you aggregated the top 5 reasons for chronic absenteeism?
I would be happy to. We have lots of data of that nature, and we have several different ways we package that and report that. I'll be happy to get that to you.
Thank you.
I would also add, I think it's important to note when it comes to student attendance, our own internal evaluation of JCPS students in recent years shows that students 0 to 5 days absent really does not cause a negative impact on their outcome scores. So if we can keep a student under 5 days absent, it really has little impact. Once they hit more than 5 days absence, that's when student outcomes begin to become impacted. And remember that when we talk about chronic absenteeism, that's 18 days of absenteeism. So it's a great number of kids between 5 and 18 days that we struggle with as well.
I think one final point that I think individuals also forget is we have issues with all types of families regarding absenteeism. We have families that might choose to have students miss days, but those families often are providing a lot more support outside of school. That may mean to take a trip or to maybe take a couple days on the end of this or on the end of that. And we do have chronically absent students in pretty much every type of family that we have in Jefferson County Public Schools, but by far it is most impacting our students of poverty, no question.
Okay, thank you. Senator Tishner.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Polio. Can you tell us an average number of teachers year over year that are leaving and not coming back to JCPS?
What I can tell you, we can give you that, and I don't have that exact number year over year. We are proud to say that our retention rate right now, I believe the most recent was 96%, which is above the national average. So we have actually in our HR department have a recruiting and retention part of HR that works to do that. We do a lot of surveys with principals so that they can address culture issues but the most recent number was 96% is our retention rate.
Do you know that number on bus drivers? I know that's been a big issue as well.
I don't know that exact number. I will say it's not 96%. It is higher than that. Now, we are proud. We are making inroads in that and starting to turn that, but that's taken some really, really aggressive recruiting things that we've had to do, which rightfully so. But it is lower than that. But I can get you what that number is as well.
Are you offering incentives to the bus drivers or teachers in order for them to come back, other than just the raises that you already have set in place?
So we did have attendance incentives for bus drivers. If they worked 10 consecutive days, we took that out of this newest contract and just added that $6 to all of our bus drivers. So our lowest salaried bus driver is right at, walk in the door, $29 an hour, up to about $54 an hour is what our bus drivers get paid. But we also have added in some incentives for those who have been many years that they can have to stay with us, that they have some stipends or bonuses that go on to their pay based upon longevity in the system. So we do have that.
Can I just one more?
Yes.
On your contracts and expenses, I'm just curious, is there a place that we can look to find what those expenditures are for, say, your just across the board, your contracts for curriculum, your contracts for legal, banking, whatever? I'm just curious what those numbers might be.
I think I don't know if in our, we have on our website a portal that has to all expenditures. I'm not sure if it's particular to contracts or not, but we would be happy to provide that to you for recent years if that's what you'd like to see.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Ms. Abdallahad.
Hi, hope you guys can hear me okay. Thank you for being here. I'm excited. I'm a JCPS all the way, and my kids and husband also are a part of the system. So I just am hopeful for all the things for public education. I missed last meeting, so thank you all for allowing me to come back. So just 3 brief questions, I think. From a stipend perspective, I understand the one-time $8,000, but are there KPIs in place as far as like a scorecard goes? So if those teachers at those schools that are either really great or also not the best, is there incentive-based compensation, I guess is what I'm asking, for educators within the system, that if their school meets certain criteria and standards, that they're compensated, again, like an incentive for performance?
There is no KPI incentive or any incentive for outcome performance. I know there are some states or districts who have done some things around that in the past. We have not done that. I don't think anyone in Kentucky and JCPS does not do that.
Okay. Thank you. I promise I'll be brief. On the nursing, just as an example, I know that it was mentioned that 3/4 of the 120 approximately are contract nursing. When do we come to a point with those numbers to look and say that there is a savings to convert? And nursing just was an easy example, but is there a process internally to say we're now spending more on contract labor versus bringing those resources to full-time employment?
Yeah, that is our goal right now, is to bring all of our nurses under full-time employment. Okay. And so we just added 35 from what we did last year to cut down on that contractual service.
Got it.
Another example of that is legal. When I stepped into this job, we did not have a legal department. It was all outsourced. And we have found that it is much financially better off for the district to have our internal team as far as every hour being contracted out or billed out. So we'll constantly look to see if that is the right decision to outsource or to bring it under our roof.
Absolutely. Thank you. Last short question is brief question. I know we've talked a lot about contracts and procurement, and apart from all the different functional leaders being responsible for their contracts within their purview, is there a procurement specialist or a director, vice president of procurement from a negotiation perspective, just to ensure that, I'm really bad at negotiating, so that's what we, bring in specialists like that to make sure that we're getting the absolute best deal possible as far as contracts go?
Yeah, so it runs through our financial team. And so I can't say it's specifically one person that it does that, but our CFO is responsible and his team to make sure that we are getting the best deal possible, and that we are putting this out, unless it's a single source, which we're really trying to get away from completely. but that we have bids that come in so that we can look at the best product for our district.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Nichols. Sorry, just want to make sure you're awake, participating. Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Dr. Polio. Numbers are relative. So how does chronic absenteeism and how is it relative to other size of districts the size of JCPS? Because I know that, 96%, what does that mean as in relation to districts that are similar size?
Yeah, I would have to, really dig into the KPIs at the Council of the Great City Schools to have a better perspective as exactly what another district's numbers are. I can say we are very similar, if not better than many of our peer districts. But right now across this nation, in urban, suburban, and rural, we're all struggling with attendance. So in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, JCPS isn't even close, to my understanding, to the highest rate of absenteeism in their schools, but very similar from what I've seen to all of our peer districts, and maybe even better than some. So it is an issue across this nation.
Same question for the. Is it the same kind of answer, or are we right on par with? Because I know transportation has hit school districts our size across the country. Are we in the green, red, right there? We all need to improve, but yeah. Where are we in relative to that?
Well, I would never put us right now in the green when it comes to transportation. I wish I could. I wish we had the resources that we had 7 or 8 years ago. We do not. But this, once again, is a struggle. So I will use Cincinnati Public Schools. Just recently eliminated all 7th and 8th grade transportation to every single student in Cincinnati Public Schools. St. Louis Public Schools has lost all their transportation from a private company. Chicago Public Schools has struggled with the same thing. So this is a common theme across our nation right now when it comes to bus drivers. I think we've, from what we started last year with, we've made some significant progress. Still got a ways to go, though, because we're having to make tough decisions around who gets transported. And that's something we don't want to do, but what we've had to do.
Thank you.
I don't know if Mr. Nichols is punking me or if he really has a question this time. Mr. Nichols?
I had a question, but I knew Dr. Polio was probably going to speak to it because, but anyways, I've got a new question that was brought up in the conversation. Dr. Polio, I'm wondering if you're tracking at Iroquois, we had you and your team brought in a clinic. We have a full-fledged medical clinic. I'm wondering if attendance has been tracked. I will just say anecdotally, from my experience, because I watch attendance, we have a daily insider that allows us to track attendance. And just from my own experience too, I know that attendance has improved since the clinic's been there. And I also noted that sports participation has gone up because students can actually get a physical right there. So are you tracking that, or will you have that information available at some point?
Yeah, we can, and I can't speak individually to Iroquois, but we have what we call vital signs on a regular basis, which is our school teams, our leadership, our principal coaching who get together. We call them vital signs because they're the most important data points that lead to outcomes for students. Attendance is one of those, so we track that attendance. So I can easily dig into Iroquois. I would say anecdotally, without a doubt, that's an incredible facility at Iroquois that provides, full service medical care to students with some of our neediest student population in the entire district. So I think, and I can't say this with numbers to back it right now, but we can come with that anything like that is a community wraparound support is going to positively impact culture in a school building and attendance.
Well, I think it's also because of the availability to have a COVID test and other kind of tests. It's made our schools safer and kept attendance in line, because we can send a student that is showing symptoms and then they can test them right there. And then if we need to, take measures, we can. Correct. So I can only speak to my experience by actually being in the building, but it has made a world of difference.
Great.
Okay, thank you. No more questions. We shall proceed.
Okay, on with the important stuff, what we teach. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Greenwell, who will begin the presentation.
Thank you all. I'd like to introduce Miss Shalonda Foster, our Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Academics, who will be presenting alongside with me. So we'd like to start by giving you an overview of literacy and shifts that we've made based on not only legislative policy, but also best practice and research. And then we will also talk about math and then some key takeaways we've had from the process as a whole. So one of the first things we know is that in literacy, and not just in JCPS, one of the missing pieces we've found nationwide is foundational skills and a lack thereof, which allows our students to then build momentum. So we also have some confusion about what literacy is. So this is just to level set. Literacy is the creative and analytical ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, and compute text. It's not just a book. It's also the traffic sign that you see. It's also on the computer. It's also an understanding of numeracy. They are all interconnected. It's the way that we communicate. And how does this happen? It happens on a continuum from the time you're born and recognizing sounds and then putting together words and then using written language to communicate. And why is that important? Because it's a moral imperative. We know that it is at our core that we need to and should have the ability to communicate to better the world and better all of our kids. So there are 5 components of literacy that are necessary to build upon each other. The first one being phonemic awareness, those basic parts of sound, and then into phonics, the way that those sounds and letters work together to form words, and then fluency being the ability to read quickly and accurately across different mediums. Vocabulary, obviously the words and the understanding of the diction that we use, and then comprehension, which is the ultimate goal. To get to comprehension, though, we have to have the other components, and that's oftentimes overlooked if we're not specific and intentional. So when we were looking at data, looking at our universal screener for MAP, we found that students who did not master the foundational literacy skills by the end of 2nd grade often had a difficulty in reaching proficiency beyond that. And you will see that sometimes when you look at middle school scores in other states that might have excelled at the first place but did not focus on foundational literacy. So as text complexity increases, you're going to see that students really struggle with the vocabulary. So the implications that this had on us for teaching, reading is a science. It's not magic. We know that we have to look at research and we have to change constantly as our students change and as we grow and as we learn more. So I like to say when we know better, we do better, that education is an evolving science. And we know now how the brain works and we know how students learn and understand how to develop not only literacy internally, but also written. The ability to write. And then foundational skills matter. Without phonemic awareness and phonics, reading cannot sustain higher level text. And then the importance of tier 1 instruction. When we talk about tier 1, we're going to talk about your core instruction. The first time students get something without intervention, it needs to be the best. And then based on that core or tier 1 instruction, we then make decisions based on what students need. So some of the missing pieces that we found, and we've seen this nationwide, but specifically in JCPS, is an updated literacy plan, which we will talk about, a consistent foundational literacy approach, Tier 1 or core ELA curriculum, that we have a consistent literacy approach K through 12, and then a common approach to literacy professional learning, which I know many of you are familiar with LETTERS, which is a statewide initiative for foundational skills for our teachers and educators, but also internally that we have supports that we're providing support for not only curricular content, but also best practices. So in finding solutions, I know some of you have mentioned partner school data. When we were looking at those excelling on NAEP, especially when it came to literacy, we also noticed consistency with implementation of a high quality instructional resource. That high quality instructional resource is your tier 1 or your core curriculum that you're using. So we want to talk about what that means. Because of Senate Bill 1, we had the ability to choose a Tier 1 or core curriculum for all of our students. So that gave our superintendent the ability to do that. Ms. Foster will talk in a second just about the process and how we landed on the ones that we landed. And then when it comes to Senate Bill 9, the Read to Succeed Act, we know that that became effective for K through 3 students, looking at the reading intervention plan, looking at the Read at Home plan, In JCPS, we made this a K through 12 experience. So not just our K through 3 students have literacy plans. Every single JCPS school has a literacy plan, and they have a literacy leadership team that is monitoring that in real time. For the first time this year, we're also adding a diagnostic for our middle school students who often get missed. We have seen that students that struggled with those foundational skills that didn't build the momentum that we are now building in kindergarten also need the ability to hone in on what they were missing. And so that is something we are excited to offer, because when we can diagnose what's wrong, we are able to provide real-time support for our kids. So before I turn it over to Ms. Foster, just to talk this through, some people get confused about what curriculum is. Curriculum is not a lesson that you wrote. Curriculum is not a book. It is encompassing. It is comprehensive academic content that progresses through a series of learning goals connected to grade level standards. It is backwards planning from an assessment. It is ensuring that it is aligned to the grade level standards. It is ensuring that priority standards are identified. So you're taking away that deconstruction work that is so difficult and tedious, and you are ensuring that there is thematic, standards aligned material that progresses so that students get what they need. So we're going to talk about how we determine an HQIR.
So with Senate Bill 1, consistency across all of our schools was super important, and that started with consistent messaging around what is a high quality instructional resource. So we use the KDE's guidance on high quality instructional resources and provided a one-page document to our schools so that they would understand the process of selecting a high quality instructional resource. Obviously, that starts with evidence-based research. And so what we have determined is most important is that it provides clarity to our instructors. That ensures that all of our students have received alignment to grade level standards. So for the first time, we are able to ensure that all students across our K-12 schools are ensured to have access and opportunity to have instruction that is aligned to grade level standards. It also ensures that we are planning with a backwards mindset. So we are focused on assessments and planning backwards. This provides flexibility as well as structure to our instructors. It also ensures that we are focused on equity, but also that all of our students have the ability to have high quality instruction. So we are focused on our special needs students, as well as our multilingual learners, as well as our gifted and talented students. And because we want our students to own their education, we are focused on student agency as well. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about our process for choosing curriculum, and I'm going to do that through our next slide. So we looked at a collaborative process, and that again began with evidence-based research. Here you will see our 2 curricula selections for K-12 math that started with illustrative mathematics. It is not important that students just learn the math, but that students are actually doing the math, and that was important to our process. This is a coherent progression of mathematical standard across K through 12 schools. And so for the first time ever, students are building a cross progression from kindergarten all the way through high school. It is anchored in equitable access, so all students again have access to grade level instruction, and it supports students and teachers in internalizing mathematical best practices. For our literacy curriculum, we've selected EL education as well as My Perspectives. These are both knowledge building curricula, so not only are we going deeper with our students, but we are focused on building those foundational skills, again, based on research-based best practices. It has a commitment to our students' perspectives to ensure, again, that we are focused on student identity, but also that we are meeting the needs of our diverse learners, including our special needs students, our multilingual learners, but also, again, so that we are going deeper to ensure that we are enriching the learners who are gifted and talented, and we are focused on social emotional learning as well. Our curricula also focuses on grammar usage mechanics, vocabulary, as well as active writing. So this summer, we've trained over 3,400 educators. Actually, in year 1, we've trained over 3,400 educators, and this summer we have already trained over 3,000 educators. and that will continue throughout the school year. In the fall and winter, we have built capacity and we continue to provide support to our teachers through quarterly academies, which take place in person. So now we're going to take a look at what our curricula looks like in person.
So in terms of alignment to best practices, like Ms. Foster said, the K through 12 literacy approach and the K through 12 math approach also tie into our policy and legislation, from our screeners that are now embedded, our diagnostics that we talked about. We have MAP reading fluency in elementary, and then we have CAPTE in secondary. We have our read at home plans, we have our reading improvement plans, our literacy plans, and our math plans, which are all aligned. In terms of KDE's curricular framework, if you think about implementation in stages, we are in stage 3 with literacy, meaning that we have implemented for a year or beyond, and we're in the monitoring process where we're ensuring that those supports are met. In terms of math, though, we are in year 1, and I'm excited to talk about some of the shifts that we have made. Before we do that, I want to hit on the literacy plans and really what those are. The purpose is to provide an overview of how school educators will continually work to improve academic achievement for their students. And what that looks like is a school literacy leadership team aligned to that best practice instruction, focused on a high quality instructional resource using the data and assessment, so your screeners and your diagnostics, as well as formative assessments along the way, making decisions, determining interventions, and then communicating professional learning and supporting our families. The experience of a core curriculum is not something I can just sit here and tell you about, so I have a video and I want to show you what this year 1 of literacy has been in JCPS.
With courses developed and taught by some of the most distinguished names in the U.S. fire industry,
EL is our new reading curriculum that we started this year. It's a very comprehensive curriculum that includes reading, writing, and phonics sections in each part. And it is based on the science of reading. So it's...
Sorry, guys. I thought you could see that. Let's see.
Very intentional and
What are
in
we
what...
doing, Chuck? I think I'm going to have to, yeah. There you go. Thank you. There you go. Yeah, we're going to probably just have to pull this. There we go. Thank you. There we go. And then you can hit the thanks.
All right, here's our next picture. Look, use your eyes. What do you notice? What can you tell about the weather from looking at this picture? EL is our new reading curriculum that we started this year. It's a very comprehensive curriculum that includes reading, writing, and phonics sections in each part. And it is based on the science of reading. So it's very intentional in what it teaches and how it teaches the different reading skills.
This is my 24th year in JCPS in some capacity. And I think that we have a moral imperative to provide an equitable experience for our learners. I think that when we look district-wide at the transiency and the idea that one student can go from this school to this school and still have a common experience, we have a moral imperative to provide that level of equity for JCPS students.
So go ahead and go to slide number 4 for me. I'm gonna start your timer in just a second. You're gonna have 7 minutes in your groups. And I want you guys to talk and collaborate. Write down 3 things that you noticed and 3 things that you wondered based on this clip.
I 100% believe that this is the right thing to do because our district has finally taken a step to ensure that our students have culturally responsive curriculum that is across the board. So if a student starts here and has to go to another school, they'll be exposed to the same curriculum, a curriculum that is encouraging student voice and agency, a curriculum that is empowering our teachers to have greater access to the materials and the resources. Even brand new teachers have everything they need to be successful in the teaching of this content.
Habitat. Can you all do the symbol? Notice that I am making my hands into a little roof. I've just noticed the increase of engagement with my students. I've also noticed that they are grappling with harder text and being able to do that more independently. The big difference that I see with the EL curriculum and previous curriculums that I've used is just the rigor. My students are getting a better better understanding of the text and the skills that they need to be able to comprehend. And that information is much deeper than years past. I also am seeing a lot of students taking ownership of their own learning.
Me and Jeremiah and Zayla said that it's about
And able to really understand the skills and be able to perform them at a high level.
the most significant challenge I have when reading is reading a lot of words.
So they're able to have success with it when they're reading it. So they read it the first time, they may not understand it. The second time we go through and we look at it a little deeper, so they're able to understand it.
On our bookmark, did we describe the challenges and the strategies the challenges we face and the strategies we're using to overcome this year to become better readers?
Yes.
All right. Writing is such a complex task that they're able to demonstrate their knowledge through writing. And writing is a hard skill to master, and they're able to demonstrate their comprehension through their writing.
Another thing that I've noticed with our upper grades is their ability for writing has really increased. The achievement in writing, where they are spending a significant amount of time in one particular unit writing towards the end, they are really learning to become better writers through this program as well, more so than we've seen at the past here at Simple.
And what sound does it make?
Oh, wait.
Another way to include or to enhance sense of belonging is for students to see themselves in the curriculum. And EL does a good job of being very diverse and allowing students to see themselves in the curriculum.
There is absolute joy in our classrooms during reading. When you take a look through the hallways at Simple and go into these classrooms during reading, our kiddos are super excited to open those books. They're excited, and a lot of our intermediate teachers have found that students are experiencing themselves in some of the books they're reading. So that's really important to us at Simple, that students see themselves and students like them in the texts.
It's always good to have the windows and mirrors, right, to the curriculum so students can see themselves inside of the material, and we have that within these texts. So we have a lot of different things that reflect different cultures, maybe some that some of the families do know in the community and some that don't know or weren't aware of whatsoever.
We had a conversation with one of our 8th grade students who said, this is the first time that I've actually read a book this long and near finishing it. So those are gains for us too. The fact that the novels that are selected are engaging in the curriculum, the protocols that are embedded in the curriculum are piquing that interest in our students to encourage them not only in how to read, but also to want to read.
They're engaged because it's something that's interesting to them and it's something that relates to their lives. Right now in 3rd grade we're learning all about students in other areas of the world, and so they can see themselves in the characters in the text that we're reading. I have a student, his family's from Ethiopia, so we were studying countries in Africa, so he made that connection with that country and he was able to share his expertise about Ethiopia with the students.
Parents all seem to be really on board. A lot of them have requested the books for themselves and to have the books sent home so that they can participate and help their student learn and grow along the way with us. We haven't had anybody, not be on board with the texts or the lessons or how we're rolling them out to kids.
A learner, because he's still learning how to control his powers. And
we actually utilize the family resources that EL provides. We sent that out to parents. We've also created videos, or teacher created videos to send out to parents to explain this process. But we are focusing on standards-based grading. And so our word or our mission that we've expressed to our parents is that EL ensures that standards-based grading happens because they are being taught their standards for their grade level.
We've been utilizing the EL modules for the past 3 years and the EL skills block for the last 2 years. With that, we've seen a difference in student engagement. We've taken away the opportunity for student chance to learn how to read, and we put it in a systematic way.
What is this text about?
Systematic, what we mean is that as a school, we have a set of standards and a learning progression for our foundational skills, which allows our students and our teachers to know exactly what students know, so that if students are struggling with reading, we can pinpoint exactly what they're struggling with. And by doing this, we've seen an increase in student achievement with our reading scores on MAP and on KSA.
We were thrilled this year. We just received last week a blue rating for our reading and math score, and we had increased performance for every subgroup of students. So really confirming, when we looked at it, we felt that the practices embedded within EL are things that you could identify as simply good teaching, but they are really drawn out and explicit within the EL curriculum. So often when we're in the classroom, I found in my own classroom for 14 years, you're working quickly at a fast pace to meet the needs of every learner, and EL does a great job of explicitly embedding these specific best practices that are going to be high yield for all learners. We felt strongly that that would be the case, and we're thrilled to see that the results bore that out.
It's the right thing for kids because it ensures that every student within our district has access to grade level instruction. And the only way we can close the achievement gap is if we challenge our students. And we love them to life by challenging them, by embracing productive struggle, and then giving them the scaffolds needed to be successful within their spaces.
Okay, let me get back. I'm a Google Slides girl, so I'm gonna figure this out. Okay, there we go. Okay, so like you saw in the video, it's difficult for me to explain everything, but it's nice to be able to see it in action with those teachers that are in the classroom and the students that are living it. And a couple of things I wanted to point out about it is we don't hang our hats on a curriculum. We don't hang our hats on a company. What we hang our hats on are best practices. And so when we find something that is aligned to those best practices, such as foundational skills, a knowledge building curriculum, and what I mean by that is that we don't just say to a kid, you're going to learn about clouds today, and then I'm going to test you immediately on clouds, or you're going to learn about amphibians, and I'm going to test you immediately. We have to build knowledge. None of us in this room want to be put on the spot about something or assessed on something that we haven't had the time to internalize. And so good, high quality curriculum allows students time to internalize material and to internalize those lessons so that then they can apply it. And that's really important, especially working with multilingual learners who are also working on language acquisition at the same time. So now we would like to talk about math. We've already discussed Senate Bill 1, the enactment to allow us to choose the curriculum, and then Senate Bill 162, the Kentucky Numeracy Counts Acts, where we have had alignment to that through our new math plans. And really what that is saying is that there is a legislative initiative for numeracy with the main accountability focus on K through 3rd. However, we have increased the accountability for math plans to be K through 12 because we know that consistency and momentum is key. In terms of House Bill 162, it also ensures a standards-based instruction alignment to the KAS for math and then that math improvement team. So let's talk about math for a second. We know that the way that we were taught math does not mean that that needs to continue. Some of us had the odds and evens in the back of the book, or the teacher that goes up there and explains something and then you regurgitate that information, or you repeat it or practice. We're not saying that practice is bad, but we have to make shifts to align to best practice. And if we know that culturally responsive teaching and understanding of how the student's brain works, we know that kids have to be ignited first, we have to be engaged, and then we have to chunk information in a way that's attainable for them, allow them to chew it, which is that internalizing time, and then review it, where the practice comes in after those steps have occurred. And so what we have found in illustrative mathematics, which if you're from Australia, that's how they pronounce it, is how does this help? It's problem-based, it's aligned to best practice, it has embedded supports for our ECE, our gifted and talented, and our multilingual learners, and it's aligned to those instructional best practices that I just told you. So on the right, you can see a sample of what the lesson structure looks like for kids in alignment to Zaretta Hammond's work, and then also, like we talked about, with structured activities and lessons that can be adapted based on data and the needs of your students, practice problems with cumulative sets, and then a lesson structure for diverse learners. In JCPS, we believe that all students can learn mathematics. We have tried to get rid of it out of everyone's vocabulary. We are all math people. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone that said, I wasn't good at math growing up, or I'm not good at math, or I'm not a math person. None of you in here should ever say that. We are all math people, and we've come to embrace that. We also know that our students have unique perspectives that are welcome and needed. Part of IM allows students to grapple with why they may be wrong. And that is something we don't often do as adults. When we're presented with problems, we problem solve. We don't go right to the solution right away. Many times it takes discourse and discussion, which is something we're emphasizing. Students can make sense and solve problems on their own. They have to play with mathematical ideas before they're asked to really apply them. And then development of mathematical understanding and language capacity interdependently. We have to rely on a math community in our classrooms, and it is our goal to create one for our students. So these math improvement plans look very similar to those literacy plans. In fact, we did it in the same way so that it wouldn't feel like too much of a load for our schools. So you will see that every school has a math leadership team focused on best practice, focused on data analysis, and so on and so forth until it goes to home support and intervention. So, some key takeaways that we found through this experience. One of our key takeaways is considering our multilingual learner support and alignment as an asset-based approach. It is a gift to be multilingual. And the way that we look at that really is a mindset shift. And it's something that we've worked hard to do because it can be difficult when you have a lot of students that come in that don't speak English. And instead of looking at it as a deficit, we are looking at it as an asset. What can I learn about you? How can I adapt to meet your needs? And what can we do together? And so you'll see that those curricular shifts that we've made have also taken into account the needs and the identity and the backgrounds of our kids. We had nearly 20,000 multilingual learners and over 150 languages in JCPS. So those foundational literacy skills are just as critical for them when they come to us as it is for that kindergartner starting who has lived and spoken English since birth. We also know that ongoing support and monitoring, like we talked about, we have an academic research division, and that division's sole role is to ensure that we are meeting the needs of what we say. So when we look at monitoring and expectations, we set expectations for schools, and then we put in implementation and progress monitoring. So we did surveys on implementation. We did quantitative and qualitative feedback from teachers in the process. We had systems alignment tools from our schools division. We had walkthrough tools. And then we also did empathy interviews from students to learn from them to understand, is this working? What do we need to shift? And that's how we make decisions in the process. We also learned to celebrate others. Anytime you're doing something new, like with Senate Bill 1, anytime you're doing something new holistically, it means that we have to get on the same page. So just taking time to celebrate leadership across the district, to honor the work on the ground level, because it really is incredible what is happening and the shifts that we see taking place. And then to be proactive. We had the ability in this group in here, and Ms. Foster as well, to go to every single high school English teacher, and we sat with them and we listened to them and we learned from them to make sure that before we adopted something that we had really heard from them and then adapted our professional development to meet their needs. And then our key takeaway number 5 really is consistency and momentum are essential. We have built so much consistency in changing the way people think about reading. that it is not a whole language approach, that it truly does require us to be intentional in understanding how the brain works and what our kids need. And because of that, we've seen teachers engage in professional learning. We've seen student inquiry and discourse increase. We have leaders with clear implementation guides and those expectations and structures across the district. We also have consistency through our professional learning, robust support for our multilingual learners in everything that we do, and then improved student discourse, writing, and foundational skills. You heard it in the video, but I can tell you if you came with me to an elementary school now, you will hear from the teachers themselves and the principals and see it in action. There is more discourse in writing. There is more inquiry than we have seen in a long time. And so our next steps, really, it's what we've talked about, knowing who our student population is and then ensuring our professional learning and expectations are aligned. So you'll see this past summer with our training, it wasn't just EL training. And I don't even like to say that. Our literacy approach was a best practice because we looked at our multilingual learners, we looked at our literacy plans, we looked at legislative policy, practitioners, and research to determine what needed to be done. And the folks behind me and the teachers on the ground were the ones that gave input in that. We're also focused on evidence of learning checks. We talked about how important background knowledge is in assessments, yet we still rely very heavily on standardized assessments where you get a snapshot of one kid one day in May. We don't know what they might have been going through at that time. It doesn't mean standardized assessments are bad, and I want to clarify that. But when we can have more measures that really look at knowledge building and how a student has learned and then been able to apply a standard, that is key. We're also working on a journey to success where we're focused on success skills, those skills that are enduring for our students in the workforce when they leave us, those skills that all of us use every day, like collaboration, communication, all of those things are important to us. And the journey to success, which you will see probably more often coming out, is our revamp of what you might hear of the backpack of success skills or the portrait of a graduate. And then finally, just keeping our systems tight. We have consistent messaging across the board. We have a wonderful team who is working, and I like to call it, we row together. And so I encourage all of you to see it in action when you get the chance and understand the capacity and the momentum that we have in place. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I have one question so far. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Greenwell, Ms. Foster, appreciate your presentation. You kind of talk in my language. As you understand, these are two issues, literacy and numeracy, that I've put a lot of work into in my time in the General Assembly. And I appreciate that we have to raise expectations. I appreciate your comments about increasing the rigor, demanding more, expecting more from our students. Mm-hmm. Now, even before I was in the General Assembly, this term achievement gap, I'd be milking the cows and have the radio on. There'd be a story about the achievement gaps. Tina's looking at me there. I wish she'd been there to help me. I could use the help, Tina. But this has been an ongoing issue. I asked KDE, and they provided me. And I know, like you said, test scores don't mean everything. Mm-hmm. But I've got KSA test scores for every school in Jefferson County for 18, 19, 22, and 23. Mm-hmm. Every subject, every test. And one of the obvious things is post-COVID, across the board, scores dropped on these KSAs. I think we expected that. Maybe that's a lesson. I think we all understand that remote learning is not as effective as having that teacher in front of those students in the classroom. But even before COVID, there were a lot of schools. You got some schools in Jefferson County that are knocking it out of the park. Got others who are doing good, but you've also got schools that are performing very poorly. I looked at some 22 and 23 data on elementary schools is what I was kind of focusing on. You've got schools that are approaching 90% proficient and distinguished. You've also got schools that are under 10% proficient and distinguished. Now, I know this has just started. Mm-hmm. How long is it going to take before we really can see the impact? Do you believe your impact in JCPS of these new curriculums to see a significant impact and change in these test scores and academic performance?
Yeah. So we know with anything new, initiative wise, it's 3 to 5 years before you see the full impact. However, because of the monitoring tools and the plans that we have in place, we can already see increases. We know that third grade is that first year to be assessed. We obviously know that our kindergarten students just got this. So we have a little bit of a ways away before we see that full impact on a standardized measure like KSA. However, when we're looking at map reading fluency from this past year, we see increases in foundational literacy across all categories for all of our students. So we have indicators of success along the way that we know we're on the right track. But you're right, it does take some time, and typically it's 3 to 5 years, but we're seeing successes now.
Yes.
Just, I know you shared the number of JCPS teachers that have done your training on the curriculum. I also got teachers. How many of your teachers are also doing the letters training? And what about your principals and administrators? How many of them are engaged in that training as well? I think that's important.
So I can get you the exact numbers, but we open that up to admin and all teachers, and we also paid a stipend for them to do that. And we are repeating this year in the hundreds range.
Okay, and we have Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Representative Tipton asked the two questions I was trying to shoot for, and I appreciate you answering them. And I realize it's going to take some time in order to get there, but it seems like you're definitely on the right track. Do you know, or do you have like a target in different categories of which you want to be in a year from now and in 5 years from now? Obviously, it would be 100% across the board, but that's not a little bit unrealistic.
Yeah, and we can get you all of that data. So what we've done is in alignment with our goals and guardrails, we have outlined specific checkpoints along the way. So what we want to see specifically in third grade literacy, what we want to see in eighth grade math. And so I can get you all of those. We actually have the percentages that we've tracked out over the next 5 years.
Okay. And one more question, Madam Chair. Is there any play or any interaction with the site-based decision-making groups of each of the school, and how do they? Because that's the reason I brought that up. I have gone through and looked at several of the minutes of high schools, and I'll be honest with you, they're pretty thin, which really raised a concern, because I know y'all want to involve the parents, which I applaud. How's that being played out and leveraged in order to get those parents to be not only a mouthpiece of what's going on, but also provide that input?
No, that's a great question. So all of the SBDMs had to do the curriculum consultation, which was written actually into the law and the policy. So they did a curriculum consultation where their SBDM got to learn about that. Now, beyond that, how that's been shared with parents, we have provided those parental and family information for them, and that is an expectation in the schools division that is shared with them. So it might be the syllabi that students get at the beginning of the year to those family plans. One of the things I wanted to talk about in the Journey to Success, which is our initiative looking at a portrait of a graduate, parents are invited into student-led conferences. They're invited into milestone checkpoints, maybe exhibitions of learning where they get to see what their child has done in action. So there are much more intentional system shifts on my end to ensure that what you're asking for gets done in a more intentional level.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Wartenberger.
Hi, thank you. I truly appreciate all the work that everyone's done to get to this point. It's a big change, a couple big changes to say the least, and a lot more work to do. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that I'm a little bit dumbfounded by how we got here. And I don't want to go backwards. I'm probably the least informed on all that in this room. But I'm trying to understand, we mentioned a lot about evidence-based, research-based best practices. So as we sit here today, looking at all the changes going forward and the EL learning and the math curriculum, how are we sure that that is the best curriculum for us moving forward? And the reason I'll just elaborate, and then I'll let you speak to that, because my concern is we're going to get 5 years, 10 years down the road and be in the same spot, because I thought we already were having evidence-based research, best practice in our reading and curriculum, and come to find out we weren't. So I don't want to repeat the same errors and have our kids suffer any more than they already have. So that's my concern. And the only other thing I'll say is I thought I've read, and tell me if this is not right, I thought there was some controversy in the EL curriculum when we chose it by some folks that maybe said it didn't have enough evidence behind it. And I also thought there was resistance to maybe the change by certain organizations. And so I'm just curious, again, how confident are we that this is the right one and the whole process that we've gone through, because I would have thought we had the right one before. And then the other thing I will tack on is the training. Training has to be, are we giving it enough? How deep is the training? There was a mention of letters, and are we using that? Are we using something less than that? And are we going to be successful if not? So, sorry.
And I just want to come from the macro level real quick. And Senate Bill 1, which I think was this part especially, was maybe the most important legislation for schools in my time. Prior to Senate Bill 1 in 22, I believe, each SPDM could choose their own curriculum. There was no ability for us to standardize curriculum across all the schools. So we may have 50 different curricula across 95 elementary schools based upon the SPDM's individual choice on that. I think that was damaging to kids, especially moving from school to school. And what it meant was they may not all be those high quality instructional resources that we had before. So this is really our first opportunity to legally do this, where we could stretch it across all 155 of our schools. So I wanted to say that is the big change that precipitated this. I'll let Dr. Greenwell answer the rest.
So to answer your question about why are we making this change, I thought we were good 10, 15 years ago. I would point you to think about education the same way you might think about medicine. And over time, we have learned more about medicine, about cancer research, whatever it might be. And we've made shifts then in practice. We've made shifts in funding to make sure that we're valuing those right things. So it's not so much to say that what we were doing was bad or wrong, because at the time, that's what you knew, right? But when you know better, you do better. And so the more we learned about how the brain works, how the eye goes across a page and how it reads, the more we knew that we had to change instruction to meet those needs. So
I hear you about the evolution of education and everything. What I can't get over, I'm an old guy. So the fact that we're reintroducing phonics into reading sort of floors me, because I did phonics.
Yeah,
and that was a heck of a long time ago.
I completely
understand. So the fact that we ever took it out is, and again, I don't want to go backwards, but that's the struggle I have, and then the training that goes with it. So thank you for your response, and thanks for all the work to get us here. I just want to make sure, again, I'll reiterate, that we're confident, 110%, that we're doing. And I guess I should ask this, and I've done a little bit of reading, probably just enough
Another
to be
question?
dangerous. So, yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry. Balanced literacy versus structured literacy.
Yes.
Is this a full-blown structured literacy, or is this possibly a hybrid between the two?
So there is a place and time for both. And what we have gotten wrong in the past is that we have only focused on one or the other. When we say foundational literacy, that is a structured approach to ensuring that we're following science and research to show students that there is an intentional way that they can learn to read. That doesn't mean, though, that a balanced approach can't come once they have become fully alphabetic. So in other words, once they have mastered those foundational skills, there is no reason why we can't then use a more balanced approach. So I think there is a place and time for both. And I believe that the curricular frameworks and the pacing guides we have now are a good approach that values what is best practice at this time.
Thank you.
Representative Tipton, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your comment and question. I believe I filed the first draft of a bill to improve early literacy in 2017. It was 2022 before Senator West and I got that passed. it was quite a struggle because of this balanced literacy, structured literacy debate. The legislation we have, the effort, is modeled a lot like what happened in Mississippi, often referred to as the Mississippi Miracle. They were consistently 50th in the nation. The last 2 years, they've had the highest rate of gain in reading in the nation for the last 2 years. They're about the middle of the pack now. So many states are following this. A couple of points. Part of the Senate Bill 9, there is an external evaluator. KDE recently approved that contract. The University of Louisville Department of Education is going to be that external evaluate to continually evaluate the curriculums, the high-quality instructional resources out there to make sure that we're getting the best quality resources out there for our students. So just a few comments about that. Thank you.
Ms. Masden.
Hello. Can y'all hear me? Okay, great. So I do have a few questions. I'm going to only limit it to 2 questions, okay?
Thank you.
My first question is, what is the goal and the purpose of those literacy teams?
Sure. Ms. Foster, do you want to? So our literacy leadership teams, the goal is to monitor literacy and the data. So we obviously are ensuring that we are providing high quality instructional resources for our students, but we also want to make sure that we are monitoring student progress, and if students are not meeting the goals that we've set for them, that we are providing supplements that are appropriate to individual students or student groups, as well as interventions for students. So literacy leadership teams make those decisions along with the principal, and so it's made up of various stakeholders at the school. We don't want it to just be the decision of a principal or administrators at the school or English teachers. So it's made up of a collaborative group of stakeholders.
So you, this is my last question, but you mentioned about interventions, which is what my question is about. So I'm a mom and I have a son in JCPS, and he's one of those kids that needs lots of interventions. And so what does that literacy intervention look like, especially in the secondary schools when students are missing major foundational literacy skills?
I love that you asked this question because secondary is my passion. So let's talk first about interventions and what those supports look like. The Tier 1 curriculum is where we have to start. We have to have a solid Tier 1 approach. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we are giving solid Tier 1 curriculum support. Then we are providing supplemental support for those students based on where they are with the Tier 1 curriculum. What we are implementing this year, I'm not certain what grade level your student is in, but at the middle school level, we do MAP growth as the universal screener, and we do CERT at the high school level. This year, we will be implementing CAPTI, which is a reading diagnostic. And so students who are not performing and meeting their benchmarks on either MAP growth or on CERT will take that reading diagnostic, and it will provide more information about those foundational literacy skills, and it will provide families and teachers with specific individual information for those students about what we can do to help progress those students on those foundational skills. So it's going to give really specific detailed information that is age and grade levels appropriate. So what we found in the past is that diagnostics were made for younger students. CAPTI was actually made for high school students in mind, and they worked their way down. So it is the first diagnostic that we found that was made for adolescents.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Mr. Nichols.
Yes, I wonder if the panel could speak to the services that JCPS finds themselves that are beyond what other districts around us are having to supply for ML students, especially given when we have groups like Catholic Charities that are bringing in large number of students beyond what we even have the ability to enroll in the Newcomer Academy and other services that we offer. And what does that do to our accountability? And does that create further financial strain upon the district? Can you speak to that?
Sure. So we have nearly 20,000 multilingual learners. The population has grown significantly over the past few years. Our students do get, if they choose to be part of our ELD programs, they do get a teacher to help them with their language acquisition and development. And then they're also in their core classes as well. So in terms of cost, there are teacher increases as well. We also have interpretation that we have to do. We do translations for our students where we are actually working to embed technology that will help our principals, our school leaders, our front office staff be able to better communicate with families, whether it's interpreting something that they need to better understand or translating for a written document perhaps, or something that would be a government policy, things that we have in the past maybe struggled with. There are expenses when it comes to anything with increased populations and making sure that we're meeting those needs. In terms of accountability, we have seen that our multilingual learners, obviously, whenever you're taking an assessment and you are trying to learn a language at the same time, that's not easy. I don't think any of us would say that is easy. So we do see shifts in accountability. Our goal is to look at growth in both their language acquisition and then also their content proficiency.
So does the Commonwealth have on this school report card a growth, anything that would show a growth mindset or anything that would show that a school is actually creating growth in a student, even though the student might be starting at a very low level and that growth is modest, it's still growth. But it seems to me like on the school report card, it's reflecting that the school is just failing when the school is actually, creating growth in a student. And I'm sorry, that an elephant can't climb a tree.
Well, in terms of access scores, we can see growth from a student, but with KSA data, that's not necessarily an area that they look at.
And I will add to that, we find when we look at correlation between MAP, which is once again our screener, and our progress review of students, how they're doing in literacy and numeracy 3 times a year. In order to be proficient, you have to be in the 60th percentile or above. That correlates to proficient or distinguished on the KSA. And so, we often hear that if a student's not proficient, they can't read. Mm-hmm. They may be in the upper 50th percentile of their peers when it comes to reading, but still may not be proficient. And as you can imagine, bringing in multilingual learners into that situation and expecting them to be in the upper 60th percentile, the top percentile, is probably not going to happen. So that adds a lot of challenge to that work when we're talking about multilingual learners.
Yeah, I just think it's unfair that the way the report card is set up to the average uninformed, or I hate to use the word, but ignorant person of what they're trying to take a snapshot of. A lot of schools are seen as failing, and some of our legislators are labeling us as failing when we're actually growing. We just have a different talent pool that we have to deal with versus other outlying communities.
Thank you, Senator Tishner.
I wanted to just make a brief comment to Mr. Wartenberger's statements. I hope I pronounced your name right. Okay, good. I think when we look at the development of curriculum over decades, and I'm no expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it was the blueback speller that was used for almost 100 years in literacy, and we had about 100% literacy rate in the United States early in our nation's history. So yes, there's some basic things that just phonetical awareness, and that is really doesn't change much over time. But one of the things that Mrs. Masden was talking about with the secondary education and reading, so much of the legislation we've passed and what you all are implementing is on that early education grade level. And I look at the scores, and maybe in my ignorance, I'm not taking into account or able to see the broad spectrum of data from students who are multilingual, which is affecting your scores. We just don't have that information at our fingertips. And if that's something you could provide at some point, that would be wonderful to see that breakdown. But to see 85% graduation rate and worrying like the in between, when EL and the younger students are going to be moving through and having more of that foundational structural literacy, like how are we going to catch these kids that are maybe in 10th grade and they're very, very low on the literacy ability? How do we fix that? I know there's some intervention we can do, but are we? I don't want to ever think we're just moving kids through a system and handing them a diploma as if that means success for them, because truly that would be a false piece. That paper wouldn't mean anything to them if they truly don't have the skill set to be successful.
Absolutely. And that is why we are implementing CAPD in grades 6 through 12. But we are also using small group differentiated instruction in our secondary schools. And for most of our secondary teachers, that is different. I was a middle school teacher and I did use small group differentiated instruction, and I was probably one of the few. I loved the models that were used in elementary schools, the centers and stations that were used, because it gave me the opportunity to work with small groups of students and to make an impact on the students who needed the more one-on-one or small group support. And so we are working with our academic instructional coaches as well as our building leaders to build those systems and structures in those school day. And so in our literacy plan, that is built in for 6 through 12, because we do know that we have to make some differences and changes in our systems and structures. And so the use of the literacy curricula that have been selected for 6 through 12 both naturally provide opportunities for small group differentiated instruction throughout the class periods.
I'd also like to add, I just wanted to make sure that we don't, or that we highlight the work of our secondary. As I said last time, we are at a record high in our district for graduation rate, all-time record high, and an all-time record high for post-secondary readiness, which is defined mostly by academic indicators, but there are other major important indicators like certifications, apprenticeships, things like that. But both of those are at record highs in the district. But bringing it all together is having this intense focus on literacy and numeracy.
And lastly, we have Mr. Baker.
Thank you. Can you talk about the makeup of or common trends that you are seeing in our AIS schools? And then also, can you all speak to some of the targeted resources and supports that are in the schools that were the AIS schools? Thank you.
Trends in what way, if you could clarify for me?
Well, just common themes. So when you look at all the AIS schools in a nutshell, things from a literacy standpoint, things that you are seeing, and we talked about interventions, we talked about looking at the holistic things of what you're seeing, what may have attributed to it, and then how do we take that and move forward? And I guess as your team has identified, what resource and support, or what's the conversations look like as getting those students on grade level?
So I'll start by saying, first of all, if I wanted to reinforce once again what AIS means, Accelerated Improvement Schools, which started as our CSI schools that are those identified by the state as lowest performing. We then added to that and made sure that we wrapped our arms around these schools to accelerate their improvement. So first and foremost, I mean, the most common trend or theme amongst our AIS schools is extreme poverty. And so when you look at our AIS schools, I believe every single one of them is above 75% free and reduced lunch, with the majority of them coming in at about 90% free and reduced lunch. Unfortunately, as segregated housing-wise as Jefferson County is, we do have them spread, but most of our AIS schools are located in the west or the southwest portion of the district. So I think those are very much in common too. And then we could start with, in many of these school populations, kids come in, especially at the elementary level, behind, not kindergarten ready, and then it's up to school staff to do everything they can to get them ready by the third grade when we start testing. But Dr. Greenwell, would you like to add to that?
That was what I was going to say. Early childhood, the students that are coming into kindergarten, when we look at Brigance, Oftentimes in our AIS schools, they're already coming behind. And so that kindergarten year has to be a true acceleration year for them to then get on the same trajectory as anyone else that might have come ready for kindergarten.
Do we see, oh, sorry.
I would just add to that, and please note that typically what has happened in elementary schools is there's an intense focus on 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Because that's when students are tested, as opposed to K1, 2, when those foundational skills need to have been addressed. And so that may not manifest itself into improved test scores if you're talking K1 and 2 until 2 or 3 years down the road. But that's an important point to be made.
With the EL curriculum, with it introducing themes of like cultural responsiveness and equity and things like that, has those been impactful in those AIS schools?
Yes, very much. I think anytime our students can, like we talked about in the video, see themselves in the literature and understand unique perspectives, understand the community around them, and help their parents and teachers to better understand that, it improves our approach when it comes to bias. It improves our approach when it comes to them having knowledge building capacity when they're able to understand the content that's being given because it's being taught from their perspective, which is a unique one. I would say that a lot of our students would say they feel empowered. Our teachers feel empowered, and we've seen a lot of progress because of that.
Okay, I want to thank you very much. That was a terrific presentation. And our next meeting will be on Monday, August 19th at 1 p.m. in this room. And be on the lookout for more communication from our staff. And thank you. And motion to adjourn? Motion. Thank you. We are adjourned.